In this video essay, I'll be responding to the reading Key Concepts in Crime Fiction by Heather Worthington. Worthington's article is concerned with detailing the prominent characteristics of the hardboiled genre, and dissects them to show their effect within narrative, tone, characterization, subtext, and historical context, and traces their origins to the influence of social historical environments and specific authors, most notably Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler. The publication that would serve as the progenitor from which the hardboiled genre would emerge, and Hammett and Chandler would gain their fame, was Black Mask, an American pulp magazine first issued in 1920, and which originally featured westerns alongside detective fiction. In this origin, Worthington draws parallels between the cowboy archetype and the private eye. She says, "The original juxtaposition of cowboy stories and detective narratives foregrounds the literary and historical links between the two figures. The private detective came to epitomize the traditional American hero previously represented by the frontiersman and cowboy." In the opening chapter of The Big Sleep, Chandler purposefully manipulates our perception of General Stonewood. Our first notion of what kind of man Stonewood might be is conveyed through the intimidating portrait of Stonewood's grandfather circa the Mexican Civil War. The officer had a neat black imperial, black mustachios, hot, hard, coal black eyes, and the general look of a man it would pay to get along with. Then Chandler twists that perception when the protagonist Philip Marlowe is introduced to General Stonewood proper. In the wheelchair, an old and obviously dying man watched us come with black eyes, from which all fire had died long ago, but which still had the coal black directness of the eyes in the portrait that hung above the mantel in the hall. The rest of his face was a leaden mask. Chandler includes the descriptions of General Stonewood's heirlooms, like cavalry pennants, and how he was once fond of drinking his brandy with champagne as cold as Valley Forge, a reference to frontier America. What Chandler is doing is portraying the changing of the guard. 1920s America has outgrown the cowboy, but it still needs a hero, one who embodies the same morality and resolve, a familiar archetype for a new society.
Why are you stopping?
It's no good. I've got to go back, Amy.
Why?
This is crazy. I haven't even got any guns.
Then let's go on. Hurry.
No. That's what I've been thinking. They're making me run. I've never run from anybody before.
Well, I don't understand any of this.
Well, I haven't got time to tell you.
Then don't go back, Will.
I've got to. That's the whole thing.
Will you get out of this and stay out if I let you go?
No. When a man's partner's killed, he's supposed to do something about it. It doesn't make any difference what you thought of him. He was your partner, and you're supposed to do something about it. And it happens we're in the detective business.
Worthington recognizes in hardboiled fiction the violence and dangers of the Wild West and its corrupt frontier towns were in the 20th century transposed onto the mean city streets of interwar America.
Okay, there she is. A real city. The future. Big cities. They're always repellent. Exactly.
The hardboiled detective is a revision of the cowboy archetype, and as necessitated by their role in their respective societies, they share many of the same qualities. Worthington describes them as professional, tough, shrewd, at times callous and hard, durable, surviving assault and injury, is often bound by a rigid, if very individual moral code, and works in a protective capacity. Chandler gives us the perfect insight into the ethics of his hardboiled detectives, when at the end of The Big Sleep, Marlowe rebukes Vivian's attempt to bribe him and says, "I risk my whole future. I do all this for $25 a day." Dashiell Hammett's 1929 detective story, Red Harvest, features the Continental Op caught in a turf war between rival gangs who have taken over the town of Personville. The Op sows dissent and misinformation between the gangs until they've all but done the Op's work for him. Red Harvest would influence Japanese filmmaker Akira Kurosawa's film Yojimbo, set in a town where two crime families are vying for power, until a masterless samurai arrives and plays both sides for his benefit. Yojimbo influenced Italian filmmaker Sergio Leone, who 3 years later reproduced the plot in A Fistful of Dollars, except this time adapted to the Wild West, where the incorruptible archetype of the hardboiled detective, born from the harsh realities of the Western frontier, had come full circle. The Long Goodbye, a 1973 film adaptation of Chandler's novel of the same name by Robert Altman, can be considered either satire or revision. Altman's version of the story sees Philip Marlowe travel to Tijuana near the end of the film. Marlowe's finally figured out who is the real culprit of the film's events. It's none other than his close friend Terry Lennox, who Marlowe helped to flee the United States at the start of the film. Since then, Lennox has faked his own death, framed Marlowe for the theft of a crime boss's money, and gotten away with the murder of his own wife after she discovered he was having an affair. Despite their previous friendship, Marlowe tracks down Lennox and kills him for his crimes, an act that bears strong similarities to the Western tales of black hat, white hat morality, and the cowboys and sheriffs who bear the rule of law.
Hell, nobody cares.
Yeah. Nobody cares but me.
Well, that's you, Marlowe. You'll never learn. You're a born loser.
Yeah, I even lost my cat.
Another example of hard-boiled revisionism is the Japanese animated series Cowboy Bebop. As the name implies, the show features an eclectic, sometimes anachronistic mix of genres, most prominently Western and film noir circa 1940s bebop jazz. The show is set in a future where humanity has colonized our solar system thanks to the technology of hyperspace gates. When those gates malfunction, it becomes almost impossible to effectively police the whole solar system, giving rise to a new wild frontier, powerful crime syndicates, and a reintroduction of the bounty system of the old Wild West, an occupation and a hand-to-mouth way of life for the series protagonists.
Planning to escape to Mars, huh? Go ahead and run. How far do you think you'll get?
Who are you?
I'm just an old-fashioned cowboy.
You're a bounty hunter.
Yeah, that's right.
Sometimes these genre influences are played for laughs, such as when Spike is pitted against a comically exaggerated mirror image of himself called Andy, who is trying to live his life as a bounty hunting fantasy, which Andy later gives up to become a samurai instead. Throughout the majority of the series, though, the influence of the Western and noir and its predecessor, hardboiled fiction, is played straight, and informs the deepest rationality of the protagonist's actions. Like Philip Marlowe, the protagonists of Cowboy Bebop are people who find themselves bound to the rigid, if very individual moral code Worthington describes, however filtered through several decades of film noir revisionism.
Stay back! Leave us alone, please, Jet. There are other bounty heads to catch. You don't need this one!
If I let him go now, someone else will be after him tomorrow, and by then you'll be an accomplice.
Chandler's inclusion of Gothicism in hardboiled fiction as a subtext, accentuating the Gothic qualities of the expired body, introduced in works such as those by Edgar Allan Poe, is likely responsible for the dramatic aesthetic of noir films adapting hard-boiled literature. But even more important to the structure of Chandler's hard-boiled detective stories is his reinterpretation of motifs from earlier vampiric Gothic literature, retooling the sexual appetites and predatory nature of the feminine vampire for use in its femme fatale archetype, and transgressive bodies as a means of literally embodying otherness, such as in the case of Arthur Geiger. Worthington acknowledges the trend of these subtexts in Chandler's narratives, writing, "The real criminal or source of criminality is always a woman in Chandler's texts, responding to the contemporary masculine anxieties about female and male sexuality. And crime and corruption are represented by the homosexual pornographer and blackmailer Arthur Geiger and his lover, handsome murderer Carol Lundgren." Our online reading provides an examination of Chandler's Gothic motifs. Often described in terms of a pale skin and sharp teeth, the novel ensures that Carmen's vampiric or predatory nature is clearly on display. She is also implicated in every scene of corruption and murder. For example, Carmen is discovered by the detective Marlowe at the home of the blackmailing sexual pornographer. The ominous and overtly Gothic description of a black desk with carved gargoyles at the corners precipitates Carmen's first description in this setting by one sentence, already framing her with Gothic imagery. From the novel, her description reads, "She was sitting very straight, with her hands on the arms of the chair, her knees close together, her body stiffly erect in the pose of an Egyptian goddess, her chin level, her small bright teeth shining between her parted lips." Our online reading concludes, "This exotic chair strategically highlights her role as ruler over this kingdom of depravity." The character Evelyn Mulwray from Roman Polanski's noir detective film Chinatown is a cleverly and shockingly revised, almost subversion of the femme fatale archetype. Unlike Carmen, Evelyn is not a murderess, and in contrast to how she would have been portrayed in earlier noir films or Chandler's own hard-boiled fiction, she is ultimately depicted as a sympathetic and selfless character. However, for the purpose of the narrative, Polanski still connects her to the Gothic. Near the climax of the film, the hero detective J.J. Gittes discovers a missing person connected to his current case, who appears to be being held captive by Evelyn Mulwray. Evelyn and Gittes had become romantic and sexual partners only a few scenes earlier. Evelyn's father, Noah Cross, has already offered Gittes a significant amount of money to find this missing person. It is revealed that Evelyn was raped by her father, and this person of interest is Evelyn and Cross's daughter. The revelation of the rape, its inherent relation with the female body, and its transformation of that female body as something transgressive, is a twisted, albeit cinematically unsurpassed revision of Chandler's often misogynistic aimed utilization of Gothic motifs. The 1982 film Blade Runner follows an ex-cop forced by his old superiors to track down and kill a gang of androids, who have gone on the run in the hopes of finding a way to extend their short lifespans. The film is lauded as one of the most significant visual depictions of another genre, science fiction dystopia, but it is at its core, aesthetically and thematically, a revision of Chandler's hardboiled narratives and the film noir adaptations, and retains Chandler's use of Gothic motifs to associate characters as villainous and transgressive. If the film's focus on the android's supernaturally powerful but deteriorating bodies doesn't provide enough evidence of the transgressive body motif, a scene where the gang leader, Roy Batty, inserts a nail through his hand to stave off the effects of his deterioration certainly does. Casted in black and white, and Blade Runner's Gothic associations become almost too obvious. It's unsurprising that Cowboy Bebop also features Gothic motifs, given the debt it owes to hardboiled and film noir for much of its aesthetic and narrative beats. The most prominent example of a Gothic character in Cowboy Bebop is a series' overarching antagonist, simply known as Vicious.
And you will shed tears of scarlet.
Vicious's portrayal is consistent with the tropes of Gothic association used by Chandler, which our online reading asserts were established in Dracula, and are concerned with heterosexual and homosexual sex, the bestial, the exotic, wealth, and femininity. Vicious shares with Blade Runner's Roy Batty and the Big Sleep's Carmen Sternwood a pallid, lithe form, a nihilistic worldview which places importance on the bestial.
He was a beast who lost his fangs. That's why he had to die, Spike. And that's why you have to die. There is nothing in this world to believe in.
All of which are incredibly vampiric qualities. All three characters are driven by nihilistic, selfish desires. Carmen's is the conquest of men, Batty's is an escape from mortality, and Vicious is a desire for wealth. Throughout the narratives, they conspire, plot, and murder their way towards the apotheosis of their desires.